What you're seeing on the screen is yet another film, kind of the tradition that we started off with last week with John Cage's 433. This particular film is called Zen for Film, and it consists of running an unexposed film reel, and that's the piece. So, what was your experience with the piece over the last 5 minutes?
I honestly didn't even know anything was going on. That is how, like, it's that, like, unobtrusive into my perspective.
So it might as well have not existed in some sense.
But, I mean, if I knew I was supposed to be paying attention to it, perhaps, I'd have different already opinions about it.
Okay. So you mentioned a keyword attention. Any other opinions or reflections on this piece?
I was too busy paying attention to the peanut butter there.
Oh my, that is a huge job.
I know, it's so weird. So yeah, attention. And now I'm hungry.
Anything else?
Is it still on?
It's still playing.
Oh, okay.
As you can see by the intermittent specks of noise. Yeah, so, you know, in the tradition of 433, this evokes kind of a diversity of responses, most of which are probably either neutral or potentially negative. But it nonetheless kind of makes you think, what was the motivation of the artist when he came up with this work? What was he going for? What kinds of responses did it trigger in his audience at the time? How did it depend on context? How did it depend on the expectation of someone sitting in front of this blank canvas as to what they were getting into? And so last week we kind of discussed a lot of different topics that all related to information, both in the world, like what constitutes information in the world, and also in the brain. So if you're studying the brain and you see all these signals emanating from this part and that part, how do you start making sense of them into something coherent? And that proves to be quite a challenge. That's kind of one of the really big mysteries of neuroscience. Bean. So before we get to the topic of today, I'd like to just go over a few logistics. So by tomorrow we'll post all the information on the final project. And so the final project will be due during RRR week when the class meets. So that would be 5 p.m. on May 7th. But you'll have all that information. It's basically 2 pages written, roughly speaking, but it's very open to the particular type of project you're pursuing, be it like an art piece or something experiential. Obviously, 2 pages may not apply in that case, but stay on the lookout for that. And then also, we've posted this week's assignment, and so for the next few weeks, we would really like to hear your perspectives on the experiences that we are going to be having on every week, including today. What are your reflections? How does it fit into what's going on in your life? What was disappointing about it? What was exciting about it? Things like that. So make sure to do that by Monday. And obviously, it's hard to do these assignments if you're not there for the experience. So part of the I think steps leading up to completing the assignment is just like being very mindful and participating in the experience. And so also during our week we'll have optional presentations. So people who have, any of you who are really kind of interested in getting feedback or very excited about what you found in your work, or very confused or very troubled, whatever your status is with your project, we invite you to come present your work, share it with your your peers and see, what their thoughts are. And a lot of times that can really help in kind of consolidating, the kind of chaos of ideas that comes out of these kinds of projects. So who might be interested in presenting in the last class? So the last class is totally optional, showing up is optional, presenting is optional. It's mainly just for people who are excited about. So let's see.
Is this the last class before RR week? Or
It would be during our. So up high, roughly 5 or so. So it's totally non-committal. You're just kind of like throwing the word out there to be, determined in the future. And so we'll kind of touch base with you guys in the next few weeks and just see where you're at with your work, and maybe some of you will stumble upon something that makes you really excited to share, so you're welcome to change your mind at any point. As we said last week, all the facilitators are very available for you to kind of bounce ideas off of as they come about. I know Drew mentioned that he thought that a lot of his discussions went to really nice places. Maybe you want to say something about?
No, it's just I've met with 4 of you so far, and I talked about project ideas, and I think that I'm super excited to see everybody's see what they all come up with, and then in the conversation though, just going back and forth, we came up with new ideas in each conversation that we had. So it was I think it was helpful for everybody. So I encourage you all to email your point person and just take 15 minutes, meet a free speech, grab a cup of coffee, and just talk to me. Your projects are cool ideas and are cool topics, and they're fun for us to talk about. So we're into it.
Thanks. Okay, so another part of this is that a few of you are doing experiments or projects that involve subjects, and I know some of you were really enthusiastic about having more subjects in your studies. So does anyone want to pitch their project and try to get some subjects from a large pool of people? You want to say something about yours?
Yeah, so I'm trying to get people to stop using social media on their phones and on the computer for at least 3 days to see what their experience is like, and if it's like an addiction, or what kind of feelings you get out of from not using social media as you do every day. So if you guys are interested, email me. I'll put my email on the board.
Yeah, maybe you could even go ahead and put your email. We could also pass the sheet around and collect.
We can especially go on Facebook.
So when you say not using social media, do you include people who've had experiences in the past where they haven't been able to use it for extended periods of time?
Yeah, if you guys have done that before, if you guys have tried not using Facebook for an extended period of time, that'd be great. Tell me your experience.
And how many days are you?
Well, at least 3 days. But if you can go more, that's great.
Okay. So would that include email as well?
No. So if the social media if it's used solely for entertainment purposes, then you can't go in it. So if you're going to go on Twitter for professional purposes or something like that, then that's fine.
Okay. Cool. Anyone else want to pitch their project?
Hey, I might need some actors for a very fun film, so if anyone's interested, I too will write my thing up on the film.
On this board.
Wait, so what's your project about?
1 second. I'm
trying to relate an altered state. Oh my. That's fine. I'm trying to relate an altered state of mind I was in. And so a lot of it is going to be me like acting with myself, but that becomes increasingly difficult over time. And a big part of it is also my interaction with other people. So it's fun, and I'm like a cool film director. I've done a lot of that before in the past, and it would be like lighthearted, and I'll tell you what to do, and you just have fun with it. But I don't want to say too much right now, because like I want to save some surprise for the airing of the film. So yes, all right.
And what kind of time commitment?
Oh, it's whatever works for you. I'll just make it work. I'm pretty flexible.
Right. Cool. And anyone else? Okay. So you might remember earlier in the semester we tried to organize a field trip to a late night event in the depths of Oakland, and it was rescheduled a few times, so it's been rescheduled for April 19th. Which is the infamous Bicycle Day. It's this kind of event that, or this cultural nexus that is celebrated all over the world, including the Bay Area, that commemorates the discovery of LSD by a guy in Switzerland way back in the day. And since then, people have taken the opportunity to celebrate this event in all kinds of contexts. And so we will be leading a field trip. We will be totally sober, of course, but it will give you an opportunity to kind of see the types of interactions that have emerged in the Bay Area around these kinds of lifestyles. And so I'm going to pass out the attendance sheet, and if you're interested potentially in this field trip and want to receive more information, just put a little star next to your name and we'll send you the info as it comes about. All right, so now we get back to the topic at hand, which has to do with attention. And last week we talked a lot about information and how information has this very subjective quality to it. It not only is something that exists in the world, but it also has to do with how we interpret streams of information that are coming at us. And a very big part of this is attention. And this is something that our guest, Kareem, will talk to us about later and lead us in an experiment into. And it's something that we kind of engage every moment of every day at some level. And so kind of one question that arises is, what is the quality of your attention? When you think about what attention is for you, what is it like? What is its flavor? How does it change moment to moment? How does it not change?
I feel like attention, like you're constantly taking in information, but attention to me is like the small part of your consciousness that you focus on things. Whatever that is, you're very conscious of it. I mean, you can subconsciously be paying attention, but attention is that conscious part.
And in a way, a lot of the words you use are very intertwined. So you mentioned conscious, you mentioned focus. All of these things, in a way, create this constellation. Does anyone want to kind of dissect it further, like either the concept of focus or conscious or attention? Like, what is it? What is that moment of converging focus onto something? What happens?
I think I'm thinking of reading, but I guess when attention, there's so many things happening, and how you filter down if you want to focus in. It's one is what you're interested on, or what you're required to pay attention to. Like the reading talks about all of this, all these things in front of you, but it has to be synchronized. So like whatever wavelengths, or I don't even know about wavelengths, but whatever area or what's that two words? Let's say, well, they give an example of like A and B. Like if you want to synchronize with A, they tell you to pay attention to A. Your brain, different areas of the brain are going to synchronize to a specific area. So if you think about it in like in a more neuroscientific or neuroscientific way, just if that aspect interests you, you have to pay attention more to it. Like for instance, when you're studying for like the subject, even though like you're like, oh music, oh there's a friend, there's this and that, kind of filter them out and like, all right, I'm gonna need to study this for. So, but yeah, it's hard to achieve, especially for me. Everything is just wonderful.
So why would we have attention? So you mentioned like studying, for example. Like what does this like quality of attention give us that we wouldn't have without attention?
Especially considering the fact that probably a lot of people have noticed, like, you cannot pay attention to something and do very well with it, do very well at dealing with, like, driving a car. You can be very unconscious of what you're doing and do very well. Walking around, doing little things and everything like this.
Yeah, the first time you drove a car, I bet you get a lot of attention.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it in the sense that when you're first learning something or you're first needing to do something, you usually like pay attention to that. And so a lot of things we do in our daily life, like walking, eating, all of these like basic things, I think more attention was given to them when they like were first learned or first acquired. But then as you get better at things, you don't need to focus on them as much. And there's this interesting study that someone recently presented to me about whether meditation like increases your ability to pay attention to things. And an interesting question that came out of it was whether attention was because they did see improvements in like one a tedious task where you had to like tell if the line was longer or shorter and click a button for a long period of time. And the question became like, is it that their attention was better, or is it that they became better at the task and so they didn't need to apply as much attention to the task? And I think that's something interesting for us to think about as college students. Like, something that happens to me a lot is if I'm trying to think of something really complicated, I'll fall asleep. And like, not like spontaneously like asleep, but like I get droopy, or I'm just like slowly like waning, and like I feel like it's connected to this like inability to pay attention, and the brain just kind of like slowing itself down. But like doing something like you guys had to graph the slope of a line, like you don't have to pay attention to that. But I watch high school students like almost fall asleep as I'm just like, okay, what's the slope? You know, it's like these tasks that may have taken attention and drained us, now we can do like efficiently.
On that point, I think the subconscious is a great learner, and perhaps like the yearn to fall asleep is to let the subconscious take over when the conscious isn't doing so well. But just a thought. See, it's a good thought. My phone beat.
Yeah, so kind of one aspect of what you describe is that there's kind of this paradox where on the one hand, attention helps you improve at something that you're doing. On the other hand, if you're really good at something, you don't need attention. So there's this kind of like almost inverse relationship involved with this very kind of ethereal notion. And it also implies that there's some sort of bottleneck, that there's some sort of limitation in what our brains can do, which to me is a little surprising, because you think about the brain and it has 100 billion neurons that are just so densely connected to each other. What dictates the limitations on what it can do? What allows us to only do one or two things with these networks that are really glorious in how robust they are and how adaptive they are? Why do you need attention in a network that has so many capacities in it?
Part of that, in some respect, is like the resolution of some of those sensory organs. Because eyes can only take in so much in the same 30 years. But at the same time, I mean, we have like a bajillion, whatever, sensory like cells on our skin, and even with that like large surface area, we don't have our eyes or whatever, we still lose the sensation of like clothing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're leaning on the desk, you're gonna forget the desk is there until you actually become actively aware of the desk. So,
Yeah, so there's this kind of notion of like an asymmetry of number, like the fact that you have like hundreds of millions of receptors coming in. People become good at even focusing on activities from like single points of their bodies, from like 1 or 10 out of like millions of receptors. Like, how do they begin to do that, and why don't we usually have that capacity? And so there's this kind of implicit notion also of what do we need? What is relevant for our lives moment to moment? And it somehow seems that attention is very tightly linked to this idea of like what is relevant, what needs to be in my conscious awareness, whatever that is. And it gets back to this age-old, very deep question that we've studied from day one, in some sense, which is like, why do we have consciousness? Why do we need consciousness to go about the world? Amoeba, for example, they go through their world, they eat, they survive, they reproduce. Maybe they're conscious, maybe they're not. What part of their activity patterns is really distinct from ours, such that it would kind of merit a certain conscious quality to it? Kind of an inverse question is like, under what conditions is attention harmful, and under what conditions is attention kind of limiting in some sense? So do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, to me, like, attention is great for getting something started, but if I continue to be in that attentive state, then I'm focusing too many on small details or what I'm actively thinking about, as opposed to letting, I think they call it, muscle memory take over. And I mean, if you are conscious of what you're doing, you can actually flub it much easier. And I think there's a term for it, which I'm trying to recall, where like you're a basketball player and you can play really great, and then all of a sudden you start thinking about what you're doing and you botch it. What? Choke, yeah, that's the one. And in that sense, it's sometimes better to let your subconscious get over. But of course, you need to be conscious to start the basketball playing. No one just wanders into a basketball court and starts playing on a whim. You need to think about it and go, okay, I'm going to start playing basketball.
So what I'll do is I'll play kind of a few clips that examine different aspects of our attention.
I'm going to show you something that's not completely legal. Amazing.
Okay, how many people have noticed the trick? Or a trick?
Looked like a cut in the footage.
What was that?
Looked like a cut in the footage.
Okay,
Like,
maybe there was a cut in footage. Any other kind of peculiarities of this?
I could have been.
Wait, are you asking if we noticed a change from 1 to 100?
Anything in the
Wait, what?
not that. Yeah. So yes, the ones changed into 100s, but something else also happened.
Oh, no, it's not good.
Okay, yeah. So Benji tracked it actually. Let's continue.
Did you happen to notice all the things that have changed since the scene began? Action. I'm going to show you something that's not completely legal. Go! attention on the money, the table turned to a stool. Apollo magically got a new hat and handkerchief. And all the posters and cards in the background changed. Your brain just played a trick on you. We all...
Okay, so it looked like actually like quite a few things changed in that little window of time. And it also shows you how attention is very tightly linked to memory, which is kind of another quality. So I guess in retrospect, did any of the things that changed, maybe you felt a little kind of inkling that something like weird was going on? What was kind of your experience after seeing this?
When I saw the big eye in the back of the hand, I went, oh, that's funny, I didn't remember seeing that earlier. That's it.
So it might have been more of a critique of your own
Yeah, that's what I thought.
forgetting something rather than it being a critique of what happened here, in a sense.
That might be why you thought it was a cut. It might have just been a different quality of the light when they zoomed back out. I think that it was different.
Yeah, and so kind of another thing that what this reveals is how we have a certain expectation of the world. We have a certain understanding of what things in the world change and what things stay the same. And one thing that changes a lot is life. So for example, a lot of us were very focused on his hands, his kind of intonations, like what he was trying to achieve. And we kind of assume that the background, this non-living bulk of matter that is sitting all around him, will be relatively static. And so there's kind of a tight linkage between the way in which we think of the world, all of the laws that the world follows, and the types of things that we choose to attend to. We choose to take certain things for granted, and arguably under certain situations, which may not occur very often, these can actually be limitations in a way. So another kind of observation, when you think about the relationship of memory to attention, we can also get further insight into what might be the problem if you didn't have attention, if you were able to assimilate everything that came to you. And there's this really gripping story called Diary of a Mnemonist. This is a guy in Russia who was able to remember everything. And he had such a good photographic memory that he joined the circus. And he would do this trick where he would look at a deck of cards and he would be able to recite, even like months later, all of the cards in that sequence. And what he did, he actually like created a mental scenery where he placed different cards in different parts of his mental environment. And months later would have these experiences, but it also turned out that he was very depressed. He was very overwhelmed. Because in a sense, it was too much information coming at him all the time from his past. And so you could imagine under certain situations that if you were able to experience every single nerve fiber at every single moment of every day while listening to me talk, it might get potentially a little overwhelming. All right, so there's kind of another video that I might not show because I think it's one that maybe many of you have seen, which is counting the number of ball tosses. How many of you don't know what I'm talking about? Okay, I'll go ahead and show it.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count?
All right, how many times?
16.
All right, any of you did not see anything weird in this video? Okay, everyone saw it. Everyone saw a gorilla?
Wait, what the heck?
Okay, so apparently about half of all people don't see the gorilla.
What?
And I'm kind of curious if I had been able to go back in time and play this video without any of this context, and you were alone, how many of you would see it?
I didn't see it for so much.
You didn't see it?
If I didn't know it was a selective attention video, I probably wouldn't have been.
Okay.
I might have missed
now,
it.
We once again return to this question of expectation, what we were expecting in our world, and now we have this kind of context of being in a class where the kind of cruel teacher is trying to play tricks on the students, right? And so this kind of changes the types of things you attend to and how many things you can.
Expecting the unexpected.
Exactly. So I think this begs kind of this really, really fundamental question of like, how does the brain achieve these really kind of seemingly very kind of abstract, ethereal experiences? Like, if you think of your attention, it has this kind of ineffable quality to it. It's so hard to actually like write down what attention is, and yet the brain achieves it using physical, material interactions, at least according to neuroscience. And so, both from the reading and as kind of backyard engineers, I would like to kind of hear of ways in which, if you were to design a machine such as the brain, how would you create something like attention in it?
Okay, something that was coming to mind was somehow things need to be connected such that the ability to maybe see, like, and then translate the image into something and then record that. So there'd have to be, if I were trying to engineer something to be able to pay attention to things, there'd have to be this, there would definitely need to be a network. I guess this is kind of using the framework of the brain that I already understand, but somehow the information is going through, and then there's something that's storing it, or somehow that you're able to build on it, right? Because you're paying attention, you're able to count and see things by storing things and then reflecting on them. So some sort of storing unit would also be involved.
So maybe like having a region that serves as like the seat of attention, and you have like a gate that you can like open and close.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to say like how you would design attention, because I feel like attention is something that's evolved over like millions of years from humans thinking like, oh, that smells good, that means food, or that's moving fast, that could be dangerous, to like where we are now, where we pay attention to things that are like studying, like people didn't have to study that. So now that's conducive to our survival. So I think it's hard to say like this is how you would design it. Because it has to be fit for a certain task. In our case, survival.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean that's a really fair point. Like a lot of the mysteries within the field of neuroscience might actually be somewhat constructs of our language, like how we frame the problem. A lot of times in order to understand the brain, we take this very engineering type approach, and it might actually lead us into these like dead ends of the mind-body problem, like why we need consciousness. If I were to make a computer, why would it be conscious? In a way, these metaphors can really restrict us. And yet, when we look in the brain, it looks like there's these very kind of specific modes of material exchange that seem to underlie attention. And so does anyone want to try to recapitulate what was in the reading? So like, how was attention framed in the reading as being achieved?
As being able to synchronize different areas of the brain. So it was talking about, I think, specifically about the visual cortex, and I'm not sure if it was the frontal cortex, but basically if those two areas, I gave an example earlier of A and B, if you're required to pay attention to A, then your brain will synchronize with A, and thus you will be able to pay attention to that. But if you somehow have, I guess, an urge to pay attention to B, then you wouldn't synchronize, and then attention would be disrupted.
So something about like synchrony, and you can imagine like two things happening and somehow they sync up and there's some sort of transmission. And this is actually the principle on which radio operates. So you have a radio tower, for example, and it beams something in the megahertz range, and you turn your radio dial and it locks onto that frequency, and it basically there's some sort of receptivity. And kind of another consequence of that is that you could put many, many different oscillations together. For example, you have the airways full of all kinds of different radio signals, and you can tune into one just by locking onto a particular frequency. Kind of another way I'll try to demonstrate right here. So Chris, start talking about something whatever.
Well, it's ironic because when you bring that up.
So really all I have to do to kind of override Chris is just like talk louder than him.
I can talk really loudly though. I can talk about talking loudly at a medium tone.
Okay, so this would be kind of another route in which you can control attention, which is used in the brain, which is just like turn up the amount of electrical discharge that neurons are undergoing. And even in fruit flies, if you look at the brains of flies, which are about 1 millimeter large, if you present competing patterns to them, they can selectively lock onto one of these patterns in a mode that seems to replicate attention. And what you notice in their brains is that what's happening in those neurons is their activities are just ramping up somehow. And so even in like the kind of simplest of creatures, you have this very kind of robust way of channeling information that is as intuitive as turning the volume up. And so I'll kind of close with a few videos that kind of show how synchrony, this kind of one mechanism by which attention comes to exist, can come about. So, you know, we still have this chicken and egg problem because on the one hand we say that in order for certain neural networks to pay attention to something in the world, so for example I say, you know, pay attention to my yellow shirt. Somehow all of your neural networks are now aware of yellow, and maybe there's some sort of oscillation going on and you're picking up yellow. But what caused the oscillation? Like, where did the oscillation come about? How do you have control over groups of neurons in your brain oscillating so that the color yellow percolates to a certain part of your brain? And so one thing that I would like to show you is how this like construct of oscillation and synchrony can come about in even really simple systems. And this is something we'll explore in a few weeks when we have our drum circle experience. Okay, so this is a bunch of metronomes, these things that create timing in a piano. And imagine each one of these metronomes is a neuron in the brain. Just like a bunch of non-living, stupid machines sitting on a table, and by virtue of sharing the surface that they all collectively vibrate, they can come into this kind of like collective symphony. And the kind of metaphor that the article explored is imagine that you're a neuron on side 1 trying to communicate with a neuron on side 2. You can imagine somehow this becomes much easier when you're all in concert. You can like turn the volume up in very like precise ways, and you can convey something to the other side. But this actually still doesn't quite get at the essence of the problem, which is not only do you want everything to sync up, you want to convey something that is informative. You want to convey a message. You want to convey some sort of structure. And so another offering from the YouTube universe, which shows how this phenomenon comes about, involves taping a hose to a subwoofer. And you might know that cameras film at 24 hertz, so cameras film at a certain cycle rate. And this is what happens when you play a sound at the same frequency. Just water, and now you turn up the volume. So if you weren't looking at this through a camera, you would see nothing. You would see no form of structure. The reason you see any form of structure is because you have some sort of synchronization between the waves of the subwoofer and the waves of the camera. And what this also implies is that you can start doing really interesting things. Like if you change the speed of the sound wave a little bit, you can cause things to go downward. Or if you slow it down a little bit, then it looks like the water is going upward. And so, in a way, this is actually very closely related to this idea of conveying information from point A to point B using something like an oscillation. And so, even though we're kind of left with this really fundamental mystery of how these oscillations come about in the brain, we can start inferring how these structures can convey information based on these very simple synchronies. And before I kind of hand it over to Kareem, I'm just going to play one more set of clips which tries to examine how free our attention is. So, attention is kind of also implies that we have some sort of intentionality. I can choose to attend to you, or I can choose to attend to you. And what we're going to do now is look at a Super Bowl commercial.
Look at you, so dashing. Come on. Nowadays, lots of people don't wear themselves. No, they don't.
Hey, son. Have fun tonight.
All right, so in the interest of time, I'm just going to play the second part. So I want you to kind of think about where you were looking while this was all happening. So kind of a third way of modulating attention that we didn't touch on yet is where you look, as simple as that. You have many, many more photoreceptors in the middle of your eye compared to the surrounding part of your eye. And so one way of seeing where people are attending is simply looking at where they look. And so we're going to see where people look at this ad. So each one of these dots is the focus of attention of one of 10 subjects. The pink are women and the blue are men. And this is where they're looking at this commercial.
Hey, son. Have fun tonight.
So, this kind of ad makes you examine, like, how much control do we really have over our attention? You take 10 presumably random people, all of which are looking at an ad independently, And largely they end up looking at roughly the same spot. And I would venture that many of you probably were looking at similar things in the first version of the ad. And actually the kind of field of advertising is full of many kind of decades of research on how exactly to orchestrate control of attention. And it kind of makes you realize that even this like very kind of abstract notion that is supposed to be our domain of free will and expression is actually heavily controllable. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Kareem to kind of help us escape the shackles of these attentional chains.
Can I unplug you? Sure. So we're going to do 2 meditations, but I'm going to talk for a few minutes about meditation in general. Does anyone have a meditation practice here? Sort of a sitting practice? Probably a lot of you have done yoga as well, so that's kind of a meditation. Meditation is, there's all types of meditation, first of all. There's literally thousands of them. Many of them stuff with breath work, for example, pranayama in the yogic tradition, kundalini meditations, a whole bunch, light meditations, you guys might have heard of chakras. There's a lot of different meditations that aim at producing certain sensations or states in the body. States of joy, bliss, most of the time. Right? It would be kind of silly to do a meditation that produced sadness or depression. Most people wouldn't do that. However, what I'll be talking about is a different type of meditation. There are traditions that are really more about observation and not about producing one state or another, but simply observing whatever arises in the body and not judging it, not even really trying to change it. And what's interesting is by not trying to change it often, it changes itself. In fact, it always changes itself. So I'll be talking mostly about a type of meditation, well, 2 types. The first one we'll be doing, which is called Anapana, and the second one is called Vipassana. And I'll actually mostly be talking about Vipassana, but they are very similar in some ways. These are the 2 types of meditation that the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago. And there are schools who really focus on Anapana. Buddha put more emphasis on Vipassana and used this one almost as a preparation for Vipassana. But what do they mean? And before that, why even meditate? Why would somebody meditate? What's the purpose? We've all got a lot of stuff to do in the world. Seems like sitting and not doing anything would be, I don't know, counterproductive. Anyone, those who raise their hands? Yeah.
I meditate to get my thoughts in order, in a sense. Like let them go out and then work themselves out when I don't have to pay attention to them, and then it comes out nice and perfect.
Get your thoughts in, so like clearing your mind a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people do it for that. Stress reduction. I know a lot of people go into meditation to reduce stress. They're not happy, they feel something is maybe wrong. So one thing that's interesting is that when one does a meditation, it's kind of counterproductive to be like, well, I hope these bad feelings go away, or man, I hope this thought, I want to stop thinking about this person. I want to stop. It doesn't really work like that. You're actually just supposed to observe and just watch yourself. And we'll do it together in a minute. So one thing that people in the West especially tend to take for granted, and I've heard it even mentioned here, is the subconscious. Right? This idea that there's like an unconscious, a subconscious, and all of modern psychology points to this, that a huge part of our lives are actually not really in our control. Many of our actions and our decisions are governed by our upbringing, early childhood experiences, specifically like the first 2 years, have huge impacts in our lives, and we don't even remember most of this stuff. And one of the things that's interesting about Buddhism is that the basic assumption is that, well, there is no real unconscious. What we call unconscious is simply where we haven't brought in our awareness yet. And why haven't we brought in our awareness there? Because we can't, right? Somebody throws a ball at you and it hits you in the face, you'll notice that, right? So what Vipassana meditation does, after you've quieted your mind, and that's what Anapana, which we'll be doing together, is about quieting the mind. Vipassana is essentially a technique of scanning your body, feeling sensation everywhere in your body in a systematic way. And Vipassana, by the way, means, oh sorry, it's usually 2 lessons, means insight meditation. And the basic idea is that you are trying to explore the entire structure of your body, be aware of every sensation. And as you do this, your sensitivity to sensation becomes more acute, stronger. And what starts off as very, let's say my hand is my awareness, okay? And so, or attention, I guess, is what we've been using in the class, all right? So you start off doing these meditations and you move your awareness through each part of your body. The beginning is quite hard. How often do we bring our awareness to like this spot in our back? Not very often, right? If you have huge pain there, it'll be easy to do it. You'll be aware of it very quickly. But if there's not much going on, you're not going to feel much in the beginning. As you do this for longer and longer periods of time, and I mean like usually the courses for Vipassana are 10 days, and you're meditating all the time, like 10 to 12 hours a day you're meditating. There's complete silence, you're not getting a whole lot of sensory input, so you're able to go quite inward. As you continue, what starts happening is kind of crazy. Instead of getting sensations like, okay, there's heat here, I feel itching here, you still register those, but it starts going deeper. You can start bringing your awareness inside your body, which is a real trick. Through your skeletal structure, through your nerves, into your... Now, why would you do this? That's the question. So the idea is that anything that arises in your mind has a manifestation somewhere in your body. There is no real separation between mind and matter. And so you just start observing, and as you bring your awareness deeper, you can actually get to these states where you observe your body mostly as empty space, which is very strange. And you start realizing that any sensation, whatever it is, arises and passes away. It arises and passes away. And so, and this was part of, I don't know if you read the Jack Kornfield article, but non-identification. You start seeing, you almost start perceiving your body as this checkerboard of sensations. There's cold over here, there's heat over here, there's pain, there's some pleasure, that feels good, that feels bad, there's an itching, whatever it is. And you stop identifying with any particular sensation, which is kind of crazy. And as you stop identifying, you can stop reacting to them. And one example that's always stuck with me is, I don't know if you've ever seen, I think it was, I don't know when it was, but there's a video, it's happened many times, of a Tibetan monk who's protesting kind of oppression of the monks at the hands of Chinese authorities, sets himself on fire, right? I don't know, have any of you guys seen this video? There might be more than one. And what's incredible is that he's sitting there in the lotus position, burning, but doesn't move. He doesn't move until he topples over, presumably dead. And that takes a level of control, and it's not even control, it's non-reaction. He's feeling the sensation of pain. There's pain, it's not me, it's not me. And he's gone so deep with his meditation that he no longer reacts. It's a choice. It doesn't mean if somebody stabbed a knife into him, he wouldn't necessarily play, but he'd actually choose, which is kind of crazy, the amount of training that would take. Now that's not the point, obviously, of the meditations, to be able to sustain something like this. But the idea is you stop identifying with sensation. which is really weird for us. Like, it's just so programmed into us. We go for pleasure and we move away from home. And the other thing you stop identifying with, and this is what more people associate with meditation, is the thoughts, right? We're always thinking. Now, of course, we can have some control over our thoughts. You can start saying a sentence or a mantra over and over and over again. And some schools of meditation will do that. They'll use mantras as a way to like focus the mind. But if you just let your thoughts come and go and stop identifying with them, it's kind of it's a very radical transformation when it starts happening on a deeper level. If you start feeling sad, we say, oh, I'm sad. And when we say that, what we're saying is, my sense of self, the person I think I am, has completely fused and merged with this emotion called sadness, so that I am sadness right now, right? And Buddhism says that's nonsense. You're not sadness, you're feeling sad, right? That emotion doesn't define you. 10 minutes later, you might be feeling happy. That doesn't define you either. It's not about attaining a happy state necessarily. And what's strange is that as you go deeper into this, those turbulences don't bother you as much. And there's like a deeper sense of peace is the only way, it's probably the easiest way to describe it, I think. Yeah.
I was just curious, I mean, particularly because you gave the example of a monk who, like, burned himself, and he chose kind of not to feel the pain of the fire. What is his, or what would you think his sensation is of the feeling of oppression that, like, led him to choose to kind of feel that and decide that that was something he had to act on, but the fire wasn't? Like, I mean, it seems like you could put yourself in a state where even the oppression would be something you're indifferent to.
Yeah, so, I mean, it doesn't mean you don't act, that's the thing. So, clearly he felt like he had a statement to make, and that was maybe his purpose. But I would say even with, I mean, Gandhi acted, you know, it's not like he didn't do anything, but he did it, or MLK is another example, in a way that didn't seem to generate more negativity. It was more, I have a statement to make, and I will endure the consequences, which for many of these people meant being killed. Now, it's interesting, in Buddhism, Christ is actually cited a lot. He came after the Buddha, and he was compassion. And one of the things that happens as you go deeper into meditation, and one of the sort of people, I hate to use the term purpose, because meditation is kind of a goalless activity, but you do start developing more compassion, and more what some people would call love, but non-specifically, if that makes any sense. As you stop identifying with your specific form, even though you realize, I am this form, I'm moving through the world, I have awareness, I can choose to put it here or put it there. As you stop identifying so much with your specific form, you start seeing yourself more in other forms, which is one reason most Buddhists are vegetarians. Because I believe there's a certain level of empathy with the animals, or sympathy with them. It extends to animals, it extends to people. That doesn't mean you can't eat meat, that has nothing to do with it. But it's this idea that there's like a compassion that develops. You stop seeing the separation between yourself and others. So the world becomes less a collection of individuals and more a unity. And you see yourself as part of that unity. And Jesus is considered an example, not because Buddhists would say, oh, he's the Son of God. There's no concept really of God in Buddhism. If there's God, then it's everything. So it becomes a meaningless concept to even talk about it. But Christ is an example because he was somebody who was undergoing one of the worst forms of torment, and yet still was able to direct love at the people inflicting, if we believe the accounts, the people inflicting the torment on him. That forgive them, for they know not what they do. Right? Whatever we think about the Son of God. So for Buddhists, they consider that a model of extreme compassion. That you could be in that kind of state, being tortured, and not generate negativity. And so like for me, what's interesting is like when I started meditating, and I haven't been doing Vipassana for very long, it's been 8 months for me, but I've done a total of about 25 days in the last 8 months in complete silence, meditating over 3 different retreats. When I started, it was more because I wanted to be calmer, I wanted to be more productive with my work, I heard you sleep less, which is true when you meditate for a certain amount every day. It was about me. And it's not like those things have necessarily gone away, but the last retreat I did, the last long one, my motivation for sitting was more, I don't want to generate any negativity to anybody around. Because all of us generate negativity all the time. We get stressed out and we're generating negativity. Whether it's kind of a woo-woo term to say you generate negativity, but you are, your reactions to things change. And it affects the people around you. I like the metronome thing, because I actually feel like people are like that too in a way. If I'm in a room full of stressed out people, I really have to keep my awareness with me to not get stressed out as well. And when I'm in a room of people who are monks or whatever, boy, I'm just in a great state, So that is the introduction, really, to Vipassana meditation, which is what the Buddha taught. And Anapana is really just a slightly limited form of Vipassana. Instead of moving your awareness through your whole body, you keep it in one place, which is what we'll be doing in just a minute. What's crazy is that, so when you go to the main retreats where they start teaching Vipassana, you do 3 days of just breath meditation, which is what most people do when they meditate, and it's a very powerful meditation, and many monks only do this. You do 3 days of just your breath before you get here, 3.5 actually, which is about 35 hours of complete silence, sensory deprivation, all in one chunk. And the goal at these retreats, the first time, is to get your mind quiet, as in without thoughts, including, am I doing the meditation right? Which is like a huge thought when you're meditating. Am I doing it right? I'm not feeling the sensation. Right? That's chatter going on. To get your mind to quiet for 1 minute. 1 minute is what's needed to start doing this. And it takes 35 hours of pretty much nonstop sensory deprivation, meditating for 1 minute of quiet. Now, of course, we can get to quiet if we do yoga or something very quickly, or you go run, your mind calms. But can you just sit and be quiet anytime you want? That's much, much trickier. But it's kind of crazy when you realize then how much thinking we do all the time, and we're not even aware of it. Sometimes we are. So why don't we do a meditation now? So we'll be doing Anapana. And there's no right or wrong here. I would say sit in a comfortable position, whatever is comfortable for you. We'll do this for about 15 minutes. And so whatever is comfortable, preferably with your spine straight, if that's possible, unless that's painful for you. And close your eyes. So this is the fun part. Everybody's been doing things presumably all day, so now we just get to really not do anything. So everyone close your eyes. This is just to limit the sensory input because visuals are a distraction.